If someone honestly believes like, hey, that will not happen here, you know what? It will not happen there. I mean, it's just like, man, probably not through them, because they're not, I'm not saying God can't do it, but I'm just saying they're probably not going to take the steps to prepare the jars because they have already short-circuited faith on the front end. They didn't believe, take action, see results, God move, right? They're not going to prepare the jars. They're not going to take action because they already stopped at the belief level.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right, welcome to episode 4 of the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Bobby Harrington, and this is Pastor Andrew Hopper. And today on episode 4, we are going to pick up on a topic that we were talking about in the last episode. So if you didn't listen to that, I would encourage you after this one to go back and listen to that. But basically, just talking about as church leaders, the different sort of limiting beliefs that we kind of carry around inside of us sometimes, and the way that I would define a limiting belief is it's a thought or it's a state of mind that you think is truth that keeps you from stepping out and doing something. So, you have this thought in your mind, I can't do that, or I can't lead that, or God's not going to do that, or God's not going to do that in this city. And that may be true or it may not be true, but the very thought in your mind actually keeps you from stepping out and knowing if it is true or not, because you don't end up doing it. So what we want to do here is, hopefully this is going to be just very value add, because we want to just go through some specific ones that we have believed ourselves as leaders, things that maybe we've not told anybody else. This was just internal to us, or we have coached many pastors, we've coached many leaders, and so we've just been in the room with many leaders that were in a lot of different places, and we've been able to hear some of these over time. And so we just want to share them with you and walk through them and just talk very practically about each of them. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like what you believe about success and growth, and like what you believe about those things on the front end is probably the greatest determiner of what type of results you're going to see, and so if you have one or multiple, as I have had, of these limited beliefs that are on the front end of the whole process, remember the whole process is you believe, you take action, you see God move. Mm-hmm. If there's something that is short-circuiting the very beginning of that process, man, I'm not a good enough leader. This doesn't happen in my city. I shouldn't even go after growth because that's icky. Mm-hmm. I get the squirm when I think about it. It's like, if any of that stuff comes up on the front end, it's really going to have a detrimental effect on whatever it is that you would have been able to see on the back end.
Yeah, so let's walk through these 10, and these are not new to me or anything. We did a Breaking Barriers conference last year, and as part of my talk, I wanted it to be very practical for people, and so I just thought over the years of all the different ones that I've said myself, that I've experienced, that I've heard other people say. And so we're going to walk the very first one. And if you've been following along on the journey on Breaking Barriers, you've heard us talk about this a lot, is it even okay to ask for 100 jars or to ask for 1,000 jars? And if you didn't hear our last episode, that's reference to 2 Kings 4, where this miracle happens of the widow goes out and gets the jars, and God does the miracle based on how many jars she gets. As church leaders, we wonder, man, is it okay to have a vision, to have like a huge church and a huge movement and to see God? Or is that just my pride speaking, and should I not even want that? And so, I mean, that's a pretty common one. Mm-hmm. How have you seen that kind of work out?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think that's what our whole podcast is kind of about. I think there's two ways to it, though. There's the first, what you mentioned, man, is my pride, is that okay in my pride? But then the other one is, man, I'm kind of picking this up. The air we breathe is anti-church growth. So, there's two aspects of that. I think one of them is probably a little better, if you're really worried about your own sanctification stuff. Right. But as I've mentioned before too, though, it's like, man, if we've got a problem with God's kingdom growing because of our own pride, that's God's grace to reveal that to us. It's not, so that we can pray, confess to one another, we can talk about it openly. It's not a reason to take your ball and go home and just stop trying to get after it. I mean, we live in an area where there's 1 million people. It's like, man, half of them are probably dying and going to hell. We send people to South Asia where they've never even heard the name of Christ. Like, take your ball and go home can't be the answer. The answer's got to be, we got to go to war on that place that God's revealing by his grace and as part of our sanctification. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've got to get more comfortable with big vision type, churches and ministries.
Yeah. So this next one, and I've just heard people like literally say this verbatim. Someone will say, they'll hear about God moving in a certain way, either through, how many first-time guests or, a church's budget or something else that a church has done. And they'll say something like, well, God doesn't move like that in my city, or, the mission's not going forward, or the mission can't go forward in that way in my city. Some version of that. And I remember one story very specifically of somebody that was telling me that. Now, obviously, like, churches grow to different size in different cities, so I totally understand that. But this person was basically saying that, and yet they didn't know this, but I knew another person. This is a big metro. I knew another person in the same city that planted a church, and their church did grow in that city, to basically beyond a point that this person was saying, well, churches can't grow beyond 100 in this city, or churches can't grow beyond 200. And this other church was like 500. Mm-hmm. And I knew that. And yet this person over here is saying, and my thing is with that, one, how do we know?
Right.
Right? Like, a church doesn't grow that big in that city until a church does grow that big in that city. So one, we just don't know that. So we should be very careful to say that. And then two, I just would say, man, what benefit to the movement, what benefit for your faith personally is it to actually say something like that? Mm-hmm. Like, even if you're struggling with that thought of like, man, can a church grow in my city? Like, why would you put that out there?
That's how limiting beliefs are, though. I mean, we just say them to ourselves, and finally we end up saying them out loud. Oh my gosh, I've done it. But yeah, I mean, are these things not self-fulfilling prophecies? It's like, if someone honestly believes like, hey, that will not happen here, you know what? It will not happen there. I mean, it's just like, man, probably not through them, mm-hmm. because they're not, I'm not saying God can't do it, but I'm just saying they're probably not going to take the steps to prepare the jars because they have already short-circuited faith on the front end. They didn't believe, take action, see results, God move, right? They're not going to prepare the jars. They're not going to take action because they already stopped at the belief level.
Mm-hmm. Man, a third one here, and you and I have dealt with this, 100 times, very practically. The third one's this: what if I put it out there, what it is that I'm hoping God will do? And especially if you're a lead pastor, right? And you're trying to lead the whole flock. What if I put it out there and it doesn't work? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that one?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last time. I mean, we both immediately, without even thinking about it, had just multiple stories that came up in our mind, because that's happened to us a lot. But man, like, whatever God does, that's what I'm saying. Like, whatever God does, I don't know why that should change what we're called to do. It feels like we're called to believe him for big things, take big action, and then he's going to do what he's going to do. We can't multiply the oil. We can't prepare the jars. We're in sort of the jar preparing business, That's what faith, pushes us toward. So, like, I'll give you an example right now, man. We're an example. We set a vision, right, to see 200 adoptive and foster families raised up at Mercy Hill by 2025, and we're clear into 2024, and we've maybe got 150. Now we're going to put the pedal to the metal. I mean, we got, less than 2 years, 20 months or whatever. I mean, we got, 22 months or whatever it is. It's like, well, we want to hammer down, like it's time. We want to keep casting the vision and keep praying and asking God to do it. But like right now is that moment where if you don't have a believe, take action, see God move, right now would be a little bit like, I don't know if we're going to get there. It might be time to kind of chill and wait and see what God does, rather than keep hammering this vision. But I don't know what else we're supposed to do. It's like whether he's going to do that or not, it's going to come to the end of 2025. We're going to have hit the goal or we're not going to have hit the goal. Either way, God's going to be honored and glorified because he's glorified, I think, on the front end by how big the things are we're going after. And I think he's honored on the back end with how we handle the fact that he's sovereign, so we get a chance to honor God both ways.
Yeah, I mean, one other kind of quick thought about this one, and this is the inherent risk, I think, of getting paid to do ministry. Either you've grown a church and now you have a salary and you're able to support your family, or you've taken a job at a church where there's stability there and you're paid to do ministry. It's you just have this thought, well, what if I put this out there and then it doesn't work, and then the deacon board or the elder board or the church, they begin to question, man, is this guy even a good leader? Can he really lead at this level? And there's just mixed motivations in ministry. And when you get paid, I just think there's just a risk of that, So number 4, I don't know that anyone actually says this one out loud, but I definitely have felt this from people. And the way that I phrase it is, I'm scared of the responsibilities that come with the blessing. Mm-hmm. And the way that I would hear people talk about this is, honestly, most of the time people actually try to spiritualize this instead of it actually being a limited belief. But you basically hear a pastor kind of bemoaning the fact that their church has gotten to the size that it is, because now his life is so chaotic and overwhelmed, and he just kind of wishes that he could go back to, some other pastor he's talking to where the church is much smaller. And it's almost like this, it's almost like an anti-mega church sort of thing, like it's almost more spiritual to have that non-chaotic, where the demands of ministry aren't so high. Have you heard people?
Yeah, and it gets, what happens is I think people sensationalize stories from mega churches where pastors fall, and they say, see, it's the size and it's the complexity and all that, and it's the responsibility that is causing that. Of course, they don't have a control group of smaller churches, so there's no way to really know, is this stuff happening at a higher clip? But yeah, I think we believe, we hear that enough to where we believe the church growing is going to hurt me. It's going to take from me. It's going to hurt me, and I don't know that I want to go there.
Yeah, I heard one entrepreneur say it like this: entrepreneurs will not grow beyond their pain line, which basically just means at whatever point the organization brings chaos to a person's life, they'll stop right there. And I would just say, the way to engage that is man, we pray and in humility try to learn from others and ask that God would make us better leaders, because a bigger church doesn't necessarily mean less time with your kids, less time with your spouse, more chaos in your life. In fact, I think if you can try to grow in your leader and have some brothers, sisters speak into your life, a big church can provide stability to maybe be more healthy than a smaller church where you're not having to do everything on your own. Number 5.
Yeah, I mean, let me just, you're right. Because I just think it's really true. Size isn't the determiner of what you're talking about.
Right.
We think it is. I don't want to go to that next level because of the responsibility. But there are guys right now that I know in North Carolina, at least, that are doing smaller church world extremely well, healthy, and there are guys doing small church world unhealthy.
Right.
And that's true of big church too. That's why it's really a false limiting belief. That next breakthrough could end up being something that brings more peace, not chaos, but we don't view it like that.
Right. Number 5, we hide our fear and anxiety behind good stewardship and mitigating risk. This is hard. I mean, and it's, I would only say this generally. Like, I wouldn't have the pride or hubris to go apply this to somebody else and say, well, that's what you're doing. What's behind what you're saying as mitigating risk is, actually just fear. But I've just felt that myself before, where, and we see this in churches where, like the stewardship of the finances, for example, or whatever, the loan to value ratio of some loan or whatever, but ends up becoming sort of like the driving factor for why we're doing what we're doing. And as churches get bigger and there's boards and there's accountability and man, we have all of that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we're just afraid. And sometimes I think God wants us to step out and make decisions that we can't necessarily logically write up on the board. A 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, do we all agree here? Sometimes we're going to have to make decisions that don't logically make a lot of sense because that's what it looks like to lead in faith.
Yeah, and stewardship actually is the opposite of what we think of when we think of the term stewardship, because many people think stewardship, they think saving and safe.
Right.
But
that's a good point.
Like, the parable of the talents, the one that did save and safe was actually called the bad steward. The good steward is the one that goes and risks and doesn't view. We think, man, saving and safe means I'm protecting God's money. It's like, no, actually that means you're kind of acting like it's yours. What God has done is put it in your hand to go make more, meaning, like the parable of the talents, like go make more with it. Or in our case, he's given us talents, not, like actual talents to go make more disciples. You don't bury that stuff. So I think for us, we need to be good stewards in that we are investing what God has given us into kingdom growth, not hoarding, saving, burying.
So another one, we fear what other people are going to think. And like, I think the way that this plays out, and I've probably made these statements before. I mean, we've probably made these statements before, and I've heard people say this, like sometimes when a church grows or a person's successful or you see God moving, there's a tendency at times for people to kind of like delegitimize that. Like, oh, if that church is growing that fast, they must be actually doing something wrong, not doing something right. And those people can be kind of villainized at times. And so not everybody deals with, this one, but some people can just have a fear of like, I don't want to put myself out there. What are people going to think? People are going to think I'm so prideful. People are going to think that I think I'm so awesome. But it can keep us actually from doing like the thing actually God wants us to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I struggle with that personally. I mean, this podcast, our Breaking Barriers conference, my own social media is something that I could not have done 5 years ago because I was too immature in this area. I think people probably would have said, "Oh, he's so humble," and it's like, it might be he's so fearful. He just doesn't. I don't want to be seen as trying to be more. My biggest fear in life is to have come to the head of the table and be asked to go back. Like in the parable. I mean that, and so, but you can be so afraid of that, clothing it in humility, all that you end up missing out on God's best to work through you. And that's where, man, I feel like with Breaking Barriers and some of the churches we've been able to coach, I've just had to like have brothers around me that are like, hey man, this is out of my comfort zone, but like I need to grow. Like, up until a year ago, I didn't have social media. It's like, well, our media team says, man, that hurts us a little bit. Most churches have a voice from their lead pastor. I'm like, all right, well, I got to grow then. I don't really love that, but I need to do that, or stuff like this, coaching. Like, I don't know that I necessarily love it because I'm not sure if I'm the one that should, or what are people going to think, or what. I've got to grow. Right.
Yeah, and sometimes with some of these, I mean, with a lot of stuff in life, we can kind of spiritualize it. Like. Man, I just need to lead a quiet life like the Bible says and not put myself out there, and kind of cloak it in some spiritual language to maybe make ourselves feel better about maybe not stepping out the way we should. Number 7, we're more comfortable with what we know. What I would say with this one is we begin to grow, we begin to see the church grow, we begin to see stuff around us grow. And that can kind of hit back a little bit, meaning it takes us out of our comfort zone because now either the amount of people we're leading or the amount of responsibility we have, or, I mean, like us leading this podcast, we're actually doing something new that we haven't done before. And when you get out of that comfort zone, sometimes you can just end up saying, yeah, I don't love it out here. It's cold. And we shrink back and we just want to go back to how it was. How have you seen this play out?
Well, I mean, Larry Osborne says you can have, you can have comfort or you can have growth, but you can't have both. It's like you can be comfortable, peaceful, no chaos, man, just kind of, but you can't do that and be in a growing organization. So I think it's just dead on. A lot of people are like, I mean, and this is not, it's definitely not bad in in the world. I mean, how many, you work with entrepreneurs. It's like, okay, how many entrepreneurs are like, well, my company hit these numbers and man, we got 7 employees and I kind of just want to stay right here. Like, I don't really want it to get any more. I know I could go make more money, but for what? I'm doing fine and I'm healthy and I'm not saying that's wrong. I just think that that is a danger for us in the church world to kind of be like, well, okay, I'm here. I know how to do this. I feel comfortable. I'm just going to stay. And it's something about that for kingdom's sake doesn't seem real healthy.
Yeah, we can't tell somebody what's right for them in that. But take the entrepreneur example. Like, man, if you have if you really are bringing value to the world, then there could be a selfish motive there.
That's right.
that you're sort of saying, man, I know that what we're doing is helping people and bringing value to the world, but I don't want to move past this level of being comfortable, so I'm just going to stop the impact right here.
Yeah, so maybe for like a kingdom entrepreneur, very much like a kingdom, like a church planner or something, maybe it's really not okay, you see that a lot in the entrepreneur world where it's like, okay, I've built this well enough and now I have, and it's all millennials or, the boomers wanted status and, advance in the corporate ladder. Millennials just want their time back, right? So it's like the guy builds the real estate company, now he's got his time, he just wants to stop. But maybe for a kingdom entrepreneur, there's got to be a bigger purpose. And I think the church probably is more reflective of that. So we've got to push beyond that, that comfort thing. Yeah.
So number 8, last time I tried something, it didn't work. We all have felt this a million times, but many people listening are probably parents. Just imagine if our kids said that, right? With anything they're trying to, you coach your kids in sports. I mean, just imagine, Dad, I struck out. I don't want to do it again.
Right.
Like how harmful would that be?
Right. Yeah.
To not try again after, because I mean, you go talk to a church that's grown and done many amazing things. I mean, you're going to hear, they'll tell you 50 stories of things being unsuccessful.
Right.
And in some ways, like our ability to deal with that probably will somewhat affect like where we're going to grow to.
Totally. Failure's not fatal, and you've got to be willing to take the growth that comes with failing. If we're going to go forward, and
learn from it. Yeah. Number 9, I have sort of a blank here, but I'm not good enough blank. And I'm sure everybody listening could fill in the blank there of something that, I mean, it can come from a million different places. I mean, it could just be someone inferred or said that to us at some point. A parent said that to us, a spouse, a friend, a boss, something we created in our own mind. Maybe we feel like we didn't have a natural talent for something, and so we kind of created this narrative. I'm not a good speaker, or I'm not a good leader, or I'm not a good whatever. Have you dealt with this?
Oh gosh, yeah. Everybody. All of us have done that. The only thing worse would be like if you thought you were great at all those things, But I think Paul talks a lot about this with, he doesn't come in word, 1 Corinthians with words of wisdom. And, we got to remember like we're vessels here that God is using, so he's growing us, but ultimately he's using us.
Yeah. I think you see this a lot with I mean, most people in ministry have to speak in front of people. And every one of us has probably been at some environment where somebody stands up and says, hey, I'm not very good at speaking. And then they go and try to give their speech. And it's like, man, what does that do in the brain?
Right.
When like that's the opener, man, I'm not very good at this. Mm-hmm. There is something about mind, body, soul, and when our calling, our beliefs, who we feel like God's made us to be, if that can lead us into
and there's a spiritual warfare component. I mean, when especially in our minds, if we're hearing the word "you," mm-hmm. It's like, well, yeah, you're not this, you're not that. Okay, well, who's putting that in our mind, So mm-hmm. I think that's a good tactic of the enemy to try to discourage.
So number 10, and we could talk about this one, and then we can kind of wrap up this show and maybe talk about how to actually frame what actually is risky in ministry. What's more risky money, but we say, man, it just feels too risky. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that can be based on a budget. Sometimes that can be based on the economy. Sometimes that can be based on, well, the data is showing me this, or this is showing me this. But for whatever reason, we just kind of make the conclusion, I don't know about that. It just feels too risky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for us, like we say the phrase, we want to live on the edgy side of wise, So like, I don't want to just absolutely be unwise, but I think that we need to live sort of on that edgy side of that. And I mean, I think this is just really true. And I think we mentioned this last time. Like, I think churches that have seen growth and success in sending and church planning and things like that, I think they got there from not playing it safe. The churches that I know that, I mean, they went for it. I mean, when there's a fork in the road, one way is to kind of play it safe and be what we call steward, really the opposite of steward. Or the other side is, man, swing for the freaking fence. Most of them swing. Uh-huh. And so there's a lot of churches that I think don't see that type of success, if you want to call it that. But if you look back in their history and you go like, hey man, give me a few times where you just freaking bet the farm. I mean, the big one way you see this is like you see churches that are absolutely dead that have 3 years worth of expenses in the bank account. Mm-hmm. Because they had some stewardship principle of like, well, man, you might should have hired a student pastor, and taken like a little bit of a risk rather than just kind of sitting on what we got. Mm-hmm. And so, I think, I mean, Bob, for you and I mean, there's been multiple times where we've just kind of, I hate to say it, but I mean, sort of bet the farm on this thing where it's like, well, man, we didn't come here to play it safe. If I was going to play it safe, I think I'm kind of in the wrong business. It's a dangerous calling, So, I hope this is one that people can kind of on the front end just sort of think like, all right, we serve a God who, in his Bible that he's given us, people prayed that God would stop the sun in the sky, raise people from the dead, bring in stop rain, make it my ambition to get to Rome. Like, there are big, audacious, crazy things. We step right in that tradition. And so I think risk is right.
Yeah, I try to reframe this for churches that we plant and leaders that we coach. Because early on, and I understand this because we've been there, planning a church with no money and just not having, everything feels so unstable, right? And, I talk to him on the phone and it's like, hey, I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z, but I'm not sure financially if we can afford that. I'm not sure this, And I always say to them, hey, the greatest risk, especially in those first couple of years, the greatest risk is not growing. Mm-hmm. That's where the risk is. Because they're thinking, well, I can't run out of money or I can't do this. And it's like, well, that's true. Obviously, there's tons of different risks and there's spiritual warfare right. And there's all this stuff going on. But, I mean, I remember somebody did a D-Men project on this years ago, and it was a pretty conclusive sort of study about, what happens to churches at 5 years. And, the study was like, it was a large percentage that, if a church didn't grow beyond a certain size at year 5, the churches that did get past this specific, size, it was like extremely high percentage of those, we're going to continue to be churches for a long time. And then churches that didn't hit that marker, an extremely high percentage of those were not going to exist much beyond that 5-year mark. And so it's almost like reframing how we're thinking about risk. I think that's just...
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I remember reading that. That was Stephen Gray. The book was called Planting Fast-Growing Churches. I think, Bob, to what your point with our younger church planners, I think is very good. I would say it more succinctly. I think, like, I've seen you kind of talk to them almost like this. They don't want to spend their money because they're worried what happens if the church doesn't grow. But it's really like, hey, dude, if you don't spend your money, that's going to be a self-fulfilling,
Right.
What you need to be thinking more is like, man, I'm going to spend the money because that's the ticket for the church to grow, or at least give us a chance. There's no guarantees. That is preparing the jars though, is thinking about like, man, how can we invest what God has given us rather than prepare for if he doesn't, move or whatever.
Yeah. One last thought that I had, that this was just like a big encouragement for me. A number of months ago, I was around some leaders and a particular pastor that's well beyond us in terms of church size and leadership and just beyond where we're at. And we were kind of talking about this exact same thing, just about like fear and how we limit ourselves and we're afraid to take big risks and all this thing, and I was asking him like, hey, what's the difference maker like in your mind? Like he does, like he's just a visionary, spirit-led leader that's just pushing the envelope. And he said, well, basically, a lot of people say, man, what happens if I fail? That's typically the loop, right? Mm-hmm. That's going through our minds. What happens if this fails? What happens if this fails? He said he thinks the total opposite. He thinks about being in heaven one day and being before God and just thinking about what God's given him. And he kind of asks the question when he gets up against these big decisions, hey, what happens if it succeeds and I chose not to do it, to plant this church, to do this thing. And he said he just kind of like flips it, because there is a limit to what you can lose in failure that doesn't have that same limit on the other side. Right. If you lose X amount of money or if you lose these people from the church or whatever, it's like, okay, there's a limit to that. You can only go back to zero.
Right.
In terms of what God could do on the other side, if it actually did succeed, there's kind of not a limit to that.
Right.
And so it's just reframing how we think about this stuff.
That's great, man. That's good. Well, hey, dude, this is good for today, man. Thanks for bringing some of this content from Breaking Barriers Conference 2023. We're looking forward to the conference in 24. We've already got dates set coming up in September. So, man, we're really looking forward to that. Hey, guys, hope it's been a good episode. Man, make sure you click to subscribe if you haven't already. All right, that's it.